All right, so first we're going to take out the star head screws on the cover using the driver that comes with the planer. So once we take all those 4 of those out, then we remove the cover, and next we're going to take out the wing screws, and we can just twist those off by hand. And after that, we're going to take out the dust cover, and we just simply tilt that up and then pull that out to the left, and it should just pop right out. Now we see the cutter head, and we're just going to unscrew each one of these screws from the blade holder, and underneath is the blade. And now there's 3 sets of these. So I think there's 10 screws or so on each one, and we're going to rotate the cutter head after each set to get all those out of there. And we can take the blade holder and the blade out using the back end of the star head driver that comes with the planer, because it's magnetic. Here we have the cutter head brake or stop, and we're just going to take that out now. We're using a Phillips screwdriver, because these are Phillips screws. They have Loctite on them, so they're pretty hard to get out without damaging the screw head, which I do on the second one here. So this one I actually stripped the head. I was trying to be careful, but maybe I just needed a bigger screwdriver. Anyway, yeah, so right there I just noticed that I basically stripped the head, and so my next idea is just to go in there with a power tool and just try and force that out with a little bit of torque. But no, that made it worse. So I decided just to cut off the screw head, because you don't actually need this locking device once the helical cutter head is in. So I'm just going to cut the head off of this screw so I can get the locking mechanism out of there, because you need to get that out of there in order to slide out the existing cutter head. So I'll slide that off, and there is a spring on the back side of this, so make sure you get that too. I do make an attempt here, after cleaning up some of this metal dust, I do make an attempt at trying to get out the other half of the screw that's still screwed in place with a couple different tools. But as you can see here in a second, that just doesn't happen. So it's still in there. I'm not really worried about it, because it's not going to affect anything. And I don't need to put that locking mechanism back in. Anyway, moving on. Now we're on the side here with the wheel. We're going to take that wheel off with the star-headed screw and pull that wheel out. And there's 4 screws here. We want to take each one of those out to pop off the side cover. So this is what we should see. And the first thing I did here was pop off the tension spring. And then I unscrew the screw holding the tension spring in place, again using a Phillips. And then I'll slide that out. And then I'll take these screws off of the gears with the chain, and I'm using an Allen wrench here, and I think that's a 5mm. So I'll do the rest by hand, and then I'll pop off both the gears together, like so. Now the fun part, getting this band off of the pulley, which takes a little bit of effort, and you just kind of got to work it and keep working it until it comes off. There we go. Now I'm going to take that nut that's keeping the pulley in place. I'm using a 21mm socket and wrench. A ratchet, I should say. So that comes off. I'll just slide the pulley off. And there is a little metal piece that's kind of housed within a little indentation on the axle there. and that pops out. So make sure you grab that and don't lose it. It's small. And then after that, you'll see a little metal spacer. Oh, you just need to slide that off. And then you need to get the snap ring. So there's a snap ring in there. So I have snap ring pliers. I tried at first with needle nose pliers and it just doesn't work. You need the really narrow ones to be able to grab it. So that's out. And so that's all you need to do for this side. So I'm going to turn it around and open up the other side. So same thing here. We're going to pop off these screws using a star-headed screwdriver. And there's only 3 on this side. And once we pop that off, you can see what I'm guessing is a gearbox. And on the outside, a couple of gears and a chain, just like the other side. Now, these 2 gears actually have those rings as well. They're really small, little snap rings. These ones, you actually have to spread them out to get them off instead of compressing them in. You actually have to go out with the pliers, and those will just pop right off. And then just like the other side, we have a tension spring. So we're going to pop that off. And that'll just drop down, and then we could pull out the 2 pulleys with the chain. Same thing, just do it simultaneously. Those will pop right off. And the last thing on this side is the 3 screws. Oh, sorry, the spacer. There's a spacer right there as well. Don't forget that. There's 3 screws here that are installed on this gearbox. And we're just going to use an Allen wrench again. I believe it's 5mm. We're just going to slide those out. And this gearbox, you don't need to actually completely pull this out. You can just slide it to the side and let it hang down so we can get access to this axle. I don't know what you want to call that. It's the cutter head. That's basically the side of the cutter head. And there's a snap ring in there. This one's kind of hard to get to, at least with the snap ring pliers I used. But eventually I did catch a hold of it. Now, next you want to pull this drive gear, or unscrew this drive gear off of this cutter head because we're going to be using it on the new one. So I just use a little ratchet and unscrewed that. And then we're going to save this piece here because we need that for our new cutter head. Next, I'm just going to punch this thing out to the other side because the other side's a little bit larger. I'm using a hammer and the end of one of the socket or drivers I have. And then we're just going to grab the cutter head. And it's out. So here's the new helical cutter head I have. I think it has about 30 blades that need to be installed, rotatable heads. And then so I'm taking that drive gear, gear drive, whatever it's called, and I'm installing it in the side because we need to have that on there for the thing to connect to the pulley system in the gearbox. So now it's seated in there, and I'm going back to the other side where it's slid in and just pounding it down with a piece of wood and a hammer to get it fully installed and in place. So you want to make sure it's seated properly. Now on this side, this is the smaller opening. We're going to put this snap ring back into place, and this is where we need the cutter head to reach. It needs to be touching this thing. So this basically puts the limit on it. And there's a little indentation where the snap ring pops into place, and so you know that you're seated properly once it's in. And you can see here it's got a little further to go, so I'm just going on the back side, still pounding it in. And just kind of working it slowly. It's very tight fit, so once it gets to the end, you'll see it. Now I'm installing all the blades into the helical cutterhead. And I did kind of over hand crank some of these, and one of them busted on me. And so make sure you use a torque wrench. I use a torque wrench later at the end. See, that's one of the ones I broke earlier. But just make sure you're right around 40 inch-pounds with a torque wrench for each one of those cutter heads. Don't over torque them, as you can see. My mistake. Next, we're just putting this gearbox back in with the screws, and now we're sliding on the spacer and the 2 gears with the chain. And the tension spring goes back on. Make sure that's properly seated there. And don't forget your little snap rings that go on this side. Okay. There we go. And that side's done. We just got to put that cover back on the side. So that one just takes 3. And then we'll flip it around. So this is the other side. This is the larger opening, and this one also has a snap ring. So once it's fully seated and everything's where it should be, we can put that snap ring back in. And then we put the spacer back on. And then that little metal piece, little PEDs, I don't know what it is. I don't know what you call it. Someone help me out in the comments. And so I just pop that in on the axle. Make sure that's properly seated. And then we'll slide on the pulley. And lastly, the nut. And this doesn't need to be too tight. It was pretty loose, and so I did use the ratchet in the socket. Kind of crank a little bit to get it on there. It's not that tight though. And finally, the band. Okay. Then we put the gears with the chain back on. The gear kind of got out of place, so I had to maneuver that. And the screws. And that's the Allen wrench. And the spacer, or sorry, the tensioner with the tension spring. So using a Phillips screwdriver again, and then we'll put the spring back on. And that looks pretty good to me. We'll put the cover back on there and install the 4 screws. And the wheel. And then we put the dust shield back on. Make sure that's seated properly, nice and snug. And the wing screws. And then finally, the cover. Okay, well, let's fire it up.